napalm and rockets, hand grenades and automatic weapons. While these may sound like the stuff from 1980s action movies only, the people of ages past were intimately familiar with the spectacular shock and awe of superweapons. Join us on a journey to explore the astonishing innovations of ancient warfare. The ancient world is an endless trove of wonder for those who care to delve into its history. From the questions regarding the origin of Neolithic megastructures like Göbekli Tepe, to the strange mix of mystery and familiarity with the Akkadian Empire and Babylon, the marvels of pharaonic Egypt, and the glory that was classical Greece and Rome. People have spent decades reading about and visiting the sites of the ancient world, and are still as excited by what they find on their latest excursion as they were the first day they turned the page of a history book. A large part of this enduring fascination is the intertwining of what is most likely real from fanciful storytelling, as it is well known that many of the ancient writers and record keepers were prone to exaggeration and outright imagination. Before we explore the staggering history of ancient superweapons, a quick announcement. Intrigued Mind aspires to provide the most compelling and worthwhile stories for our followers every week, so we would like to apologize to anyone who missed last week's installment. Hopefully, today's video will make up for it. And if you're interested in early access to videos and live chats with the creator of Intrigued Mind, consider subscribing to our Patreon. Your support will greatly help us keep the channel producing more intriguing content. Did the Persian King of Kings Xerxes really march into Greece at the head of 1,000,000 men in 480 BC? Did the Spartans really fight that gigantic army off for days with just 300 men? Did the king of Sardis' concubine really give birth to a lion, as the world's first true historian Herodotus tells us? Probably not. There are many tall tales from the ancient times that we can discount or put down to embroidery or exaggeration, and for many decades, this extended to accounts of superweapons of war as much as anything else. As with the descriptions of the battle between Xerxes and the 300 Spartans, warfare is an area that was perhaps more given to outlandish storytelling than any other, not just regarding feats of heroic bravery, but also in the realm of ancient special effects, spectacular weapons that stopped whole armies in their tracks, and often saved the day for one side or another. Could the Syracusans have defended their city from the Romans with a heat ray, as the philosopher and physician Galen seems to say in his works? Did they in turn also really possess a giant claw that plucked ships straight out of the sea? Many of these accounts were thought as unlikely as the king of Sardis' fathering a lion until recently. But with the exponential growth in the study of the ancient world, particularly in the area of ocean retrieval and archaeology, some of these ancient superweapons are becoming more realistic with every passing year. Antikythera mechanism. Discovered in 1901, the Antikythera mechanism was not strictly a device used in warfare, though it would have its uses in that area as well, as we shall see in a moment. Rather, the mechanism starts our list because it did more than any other discovery to open opinions as to ancient technological feats and shift historiographical attitudes from dismissal of the scientific and technological breakthroughs of the post-Socratic world toward rediscovering the capabilities of ancient and late antique militaries. The British mathematician and philosopher Bertrand Russell took the standpoint that ancient scientific advances largely stalled in his 1946 work, The History of Western Philosophy, in which he argued that the introspective and abstract influence of Socrates and his student Plato meant that the hard science of pre-Socratics like Pythagoras and Democritus, with their more physics-based formulations and theories, was largely abandoned in favor of Socratic dialogue that asked questions such as, "What is love?" The Antikythera mechanism, however, almost certainly built as a part of a series of devices rather than a one-off, dates from the 2nd century BC and proves that technological innovation was alive and well centuries after Socrates' symposiums. The device is in effect an analog computer, consisting of gears and other workings, which were most likely used to calculate the motion of the moon, the planets, and the sun. It worked as an ancient calendar. Was it then, in fact, a superweapon? In a manner of speaking, yes, it was. The Roman politician Marcus Tullius Cicero wrote in the 1st century BC that money forms the sinews of war, and as Napoleon Bonaparte noted more than 1800 years later, an army marches on its stomach. It's hard to imagine in a modern world where our smartphones tell us the date and time all day every day, but an accurate calendar device like the Antikythera mechanism would not have been used just to tell a person's horoscope in millennia past. It would have supplied governments with the dates and times to collect taxes vital for any state intending on protecting its interests, as well as giving practical information on preparation for the planting and harvest season. It would also have calculated the length of terms of office for elected politicians in states like the Roman Republic and the Greek democracies, a crucial means of avoiding political instability or even violence. One of Julius Caesar's first acts on assuming total power in Rome was to institute a new and more accurate calendar, one that is still largely in use today. The better to complete the process described above, as well as plan his next military campaign, and a device like the Antikythera mechanism would have made this action all the more straightforward. The Chu-ko-nu, or Zhuge-nu crossbow. It should also be remembered that ancient superweapons were not confined to the Near East and Mediterranean areas. The Chinese-built Zhuge-nu crossbow was an ancient weapon that could fire arrows at a faster rate than even English medieval longbows, and its pistol grip brings to mind much more modern weaponry and firearms. Debates exist as to the extent of the Zhuge-nu crossbow's usage, with its lack of power and thus range being an issue in many military situations. But Korean battle illustrations depict soldiers using much larger models than most modern recreations. There is also the argument put forward by British writer and military historian Mike Lodes that the Chinese repeating crossbow was not so much a weapon for the battlefield, but actually more of a personal protection or home defense tool. He cites the Chinese encyclopedia Gujin Tushu Jicheng, in which the writer recommends the crossbow as a handy little weapon that even a palace woman or weakling could fire, and if the bolts were dipped in tiger poison, the death of the target would be instantaneous so long as the arrow drew blood. Archimedes. The quintessential historical figure when it comes to ancient superweapons is the Greek polymath Archimedes, perhaps most famous to large audiences as the man who discovered the means of measuring the volume of an irregular object while taking a bath, then shouting "Eureka!" and running naked through the streets of Syracuse in celebration. The Eureka story has a comedic element, but Archimedes' discovery did have an immediate practical importance, as it could be applied to weighing the purity of metals like gold, and thus ensuring a stable currency for the wealthy city's trade and custom. Syracuse's wealth also drew the attention of outside powers like Rome and Carthage, which each battled for control of the once independent Greek settlement in their war for hegemony over the island of Sicily, and indeed, the entire western Mediterranean. The Romans had their own ancient superweapons, namely the simple gladius sword that is said to have been responsible for more deaths than any other weapon in history, and the corvus, a gangplank with a heavy spike attached to its far end, which allowed Roman ships to latch onto enemy vessels and then board them to fight hand-to-hand. They also had the Sambuca, a floating siege tower that they could sail right up to and over the Syracusan walls and defenses that were built directly on the sea, raining missiles and arrows onto the defenders and jumping onto their walls. Despite the Roman technology being top of the line, nothing the Roman Republic could bring to the battle compared with the technology of Archimedes. Archimedes was a relation of the king of Syracuse, Hiero, and before the battle he had written to the monarch and told him that with his scientific theories he can move the very earth itself if given the chance. Hiero saw the potential for this technology in his coming battle with the ferocious Romans, and he invited Archimedes to demonstrate his inventions. The king and the rest of the city were astonished when Archimedes' pulley system made it possible for one man to pull an entire ship out of the water and onto land. Overcome at the sight, Hiero commissioned Archimedes to replicate the system on the walls of Syracuse, this time for war. The Roman writer Plutarch recounts what happened next when the assault began by land and sea. The Romans assaulted the walls in two places at once. Fear and consternation stupefied the Syracusans, believing that nothing was able to resist that violence and those forces. But when Archimedes began to ply his engines, he at once shot against the land forces all sorts of missile weapons and immense masses of stone that came down with incredible noise and violence, against which no man could stand, for they knocked down those upon whom they fell in heaps, breaking all their ranks and files. In the meantime, huge poles thrust out from the walls over the ships, sunk some by the great weights which they let down from on high upon them. Others they lifted up into the air by an iron hand or beak, like a crane's beak, and they plunged them to the bottom of the sea, or else the ships, drawn by engines within and whirled about, were dashed against steep rocks that stood jutting out under the walls with great destruction. A ship was frequently lifted up to a great height in the air, a dreadful thing to behold, and was rolled to and fro, and kept swinging until all the mariners were all thrown out, when at length it was dashed against the rocks, or let fall. Plutarch goes on to say that the Romans at Syracuse began to believe that they were fighting gods rather than men. In addition to his missile and ship-shaking devices, Archimedes is said to have burnt enemy ships by means of a heat ray, created by focusing the reflective surfaces of mirrors at a fixed point on a stationary vessel. Modern experiments have recreated this spectacular theory under certain circumstances, but it is possible that the primary references, which do not come from Plutarch or Polybius, on whom Plutarch based his account, but later writers like Lucian of Samosata and the philosopher-physician Galen are also referencing some kind of steam cannon, which Archimedes designed to fire projectiles filled with explosive or at least flammable material. Almost 1700 years after the siege of Syracuse, Leonardo da Vinci drew a design of a steam cannon which he attributed to Archimedes. Though Archimedes' defense of Syracuse was ultimately unsuccessful, with the Romans storming the city when the inhabitants let their guard down during a festival, he was killed in the aftermath, and his enemies learned from his designs. The later Eastern Roman Empire successfully used the last of our ancient superweapons, Greek fire, to fight off the attack of the Arab Caliphate armies in the 7th and 8th centuries AD. Greek fire. Like Archimedes' inventions, the recipe for Greek fire was lost to time, but it was said to have resembled a giant flamethrower, which could burn ships and siege materials, as well as blasting enemy soldiers attempting to storm the city walls. By the time of Emperor Leo III, who ruled from 717 to 741 AD, the Romans had even perfected hand grenades, with which they defended their city until the advent of early modern cannons in the 15th century. It was in effect a precursor of modern napalm. Whatever the full extent of the deployment of these awesome weapons in the great battles of antiquity, we arrive back to where we began, the endless wonder and scale of the ancient world, and a worthwhile diversion for intrigued minds everywhere. For more videos on the most amazing forgotten parts of our history, be sure to subscribe to the Intrigued Mind channel, like the video, and leave your suggestions in the comments below.